All right. This is our first episode of Media Discerned, and today we're going to give basically an introduction to what this podcast is all about, who it's for, why we see the need for it, and we're also going to get a really cool interview with Mr. David Atienza, who is our resident expert on movies. Particularly, he's a Disney fanatic and knows pretty much more than anyone I can imagine about all things Disney. And so he's just an amazing person to have here on this podcast. And let's jump in. I'm excited for what we're going to get to do today. Okay, so first thing that we got here is I just going to introduce myself a little bit. So for those who don't know me, my name is Kevin Thorsell, and I am a full-time campus minister at San Diego State University. So I get to work with college students full-time. I love it. So I've gotten to see over the years what young people are thinking and the changes in young people. And some of the reason why we're doing this podcast is because we're getting to see how media has impacted and influenced the mindset and the worldview of college students and even Christian college students. So we're going to talk a little bit more about why we're doing this podcast, but I just wanted to briefly introduce myself. I live here in San Diego and also work part-time at Mission Trails Church. I love Jesus. We are unashamedly Christians, followers of Jesus Christ. And so everything on this podcast, we want to come from, as best as we can, a thoroughly biblical worldview. And for me, I've got my degree from Gateway Seminary, a master's degree in theology. And so I'll bring some of the theology to the table, and then David's going to be bringing all things Disney and media to the table for this podcast. So let's talk a little bit about what we are going to be doing on this podcast. David, maybe I'll let you kind of start off with sharing what we're going to be doing on this podcast. What are we doing here?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I'm David. I was a full-time student. I live here in San Diego with Kevin as well. And so what we hope to do with this podcast is just kind of take movies, pieces of media, things that are very influential in the world today that I think really reach a lot of audiences, Christian and non-Christian alike, that maybe parents will just put on for their kids at home and not think much of. And we're going to kind of discern the kind of messages that they give. All forms of art, they always have something to say about the real world, something applicable to today. It tries to feed us doctrine in the same way that the Bible does. Trying to influence our lives and the way we think in different ways. And so we hope to be voices of discernment, to point out red flags, green flags, anything that could be harmless. We want to be able to kind of proofread, if you would, before parents, show their kids or, immerse themselves into it, even tread carefully, if we were.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to basically what we're going to be doing after this first episode is taking things one movie at a time. We're going to start with a lot of the popular Disney movies that children and everyone pretty much they're watching, they're streaming. And so we're going to take one movie at a time per episode, and we're going to discern that movie from a biblical worldview. We'll try and point out things that do maybe align with a Christian perspective, and then we're also going to point out those things that maybe are sneaky in there that have weaved their way into the movies and are preaching a message contrary to the Bible. So that really leads us into why we are doing this, and David, you already kind of explained it, but this isn't really anything new. It's been happening forever, but there have been messages in the movies that impact us. I think pretty much all of us know that in some way we are affected by our culture. And sometimes we call those things cultural blind spots. They're things that we just think are normal. Maybe we've accepted as values, but when you actually compare them to Scripture, not all of those things align. And so for some of you who are maybe adults who are listening to this podcast, maybe you have some of those. I know we've both realized, wow, we have some cultural blind spots. But also, there are things that are even more prevalent now than they were in the past, that are these newer messages that are being preached at our kids. And, well, David doesn't have any kids, but they're being preached at the next generation. And a lot of times, parents aren't even realizing that their kids are getting indoctrinated, just as you said. And so we really do need to have discernment and understand what those messages are. So anything else you wanted to add to that, David, about why we feel so passionately about starting this podcast?
Yeah, I mean, I think my passion around it comes from my experience in the art world and just like majoring in it, studying it from as early as high school, and just kind of putting pieces together, seeing how it's that it's all kind of connected in a way. For me to experience that, but also to be grounded in a biblical worldview, and just to kind of see how it can be a tool that can either like heavily positively or negatively influence our world culture. That stirs me up,
Yeah.
It stirs me up because I'd like to see, I'd like to see us kind of take a biblical stand, because it's not all bad, like it's not all bad. And I've seen some really great, even secular films give really good biblically rooted messages, whether they realize it or not, whether it was the intention or not. I see its potential to have massive impact.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons for that is because God has written his law on our hearts. And so even people who are far from God, places all over the world, maybe they don't even know who Jesus is, but the law of God, the moral law, is written on their hearts. And so we will see Christian values be depicted, but we also know that all of us are subject to our sin nature, and that can twist and manipulate even our conscience and our moral law, the moral law and that's written on our hearts, or at least the way that we perceive that. And so a lot of times that's why we do see it twisted. Another thing is that for America, obviously, I mean, most people know that it was founded mostly on biblical values. The founding fathers, pointed back to Scripture for the basis of a lot of their beliefs. And because of that, ever since then, America has had a lot of biblical values. And so we're still seeing the remains of that, although a lot of people have wanted to deviate from that. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about who this podcast is for, because I do think that's pretty important. I think this is for sure for parents, and this will definitely benefit parents. It won't only benefit parents, but I am a father of 4, and so I am, my kids want to watch movies. They want to watch what their friends are watching, and there's going to be a point where there's certain things we go, no, you just can't watch that. That's not godly at all, and it's not right for you to be seeing that. But also, like, there are some things that we want them to be inoculated to. We don't want them to be, so shielded and so pulled away from the culture that they don't even know what the culture is thinking. We want them to be able to defend the faith. We want them to be able to give answers to other people when they go, hey, this is what I believe. How come you believe something differently? How come you don't hold to these same values? We want them to know how to think about that. And I think, David, you and I have both seen people who grew up in Christian homes, and maybe they were, very, very sheltered, and then their faith crumbled as soon as they got to college or got out as a young adult, and had people pushing back and raising questions that they just weren't ready to answer.
Right. Yeah.
They didn't have answers for them. And so maybe that's what we would call blind faith, which we actually push back against the idea of blind faith, because we think faith should be logical. You should be able to face tough questions and have answers to those tough questions. We think Christianity is a reasonable faith. It's a logical faith. And, our God has given us a ton of evidence that he really is the one true God, and that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And so while we base our doctrine on Scripture, we don't think that we just have to close our ears to the rest of the world and go, no, 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 not listening, and blindly believe.
Yeah, I would say, we as Christians are, Jesus even said, like in his high priestly prayer, that he doesn't will for us to be out of the world. He just doesn't will for us to be of it.
Right.
We're in it, not of it. And First Peter also tells us, to be ready to give a defense for the hope that's in us. And I even look at biblical examples of saints in biblical history who could not escape the world, but God preserved them and their faith through it. I think of Daniel. I think of Daniel and his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. They were probably the most immersed in the world as you could get. In Babylon, in the palace of the king. They had no choice. And they were honoring God by participating in their education and their palace service, whatever their duty was to serve the king, Nebuchadnezzar. But their faith was preserved. And the grace of God was enabling them to hold strong to what they believed in and hold their integrity so that they would make choices like to not eat the pagan food or to not bow down and worship to the statue or to not obey the law to only pray to Darius. They were willing to risk their lives for that, but they were not outside of the world plugging their ears to it. They were right in it.
That's right. And I think, we want to be able to equip parents to help raise kids who have faith like Daniel and like his 3 companions that are able to, watch movies and be in the world, but also be able to strongly discern what is of God and what isn't of God. And I think we do a complete disservice to our children and to the next generation if we don't help them learn how to discern the messages that are in the media and in the movies. And so that's why we've called this podcast Media Discerned. So for you parents out there, my hope is that it's going to be an incredibly helpful resource for you. At the end of every episode where we're going through a movie and discerning that movie, we want to equip you with questions and some form of a discussion guide that you can use with your children. So you can actually watch the movies with them and then help them discern what is of the Lord and what isn't of the Lord and why. And you can point to Scripture, and you can also point to reason and logic as well. So this is for sure for parents. But you know who else this is for? I think this is going to be really helpful to any young adults as well, because
I was about to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, because the young adults have been totally indoctrinated by these powerful movies that they grew up watching, and they grew up, wanting to be like that main character, like that princess or that, hero or whatever. And so they've learned the values that the movie has been trying to teach to them. So what are your thoughts on that, David?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of people my age can really profit out of this. Because even if we're not parents, odds are we probably are going to be soon. In this kind of, I would say, carefree chapter of our lives where we don't have as much responsibility and a lot of free time, I think it's also the most developmental. I think you mentioned earlier, Kevin, it's like people who are sheltered and brought up in the faith, as soon as they're exposed to the world, they crumble, they go off the deep end. I've definitely seen that happen before. But I think, it's because that time is really where you it's most influential as to where your life goes. And I've seen that, I think that's why college students are very strategic. When you look back at some of the great awakenings in American history, they were led by young adults.
Preach it.
Yeah, they were led by young adults. And so like some of the greatest Jesus movements in American history have been spearheaded by people as old as me. So, Jesus said that as the times get closer to the end, it's going to get worse. There's going to be, he said wars, rumors of wars. There's going to be different, like, this is Jesus. No, he's come back here. No, he's come back there. And false teachers are going to come. And what I get out of that is just like, the world is going to crack down harder on Christians. It's not going to get easier for us to live out our faith. It's going to get harder. And from what I've just seen, I really think that one of the enemy's tactics, specifically in countries like United States, is to use comfort and leisure to kind of compromise us, you know? Like, if we're not being actively threatened by governments, or, you know, if we're not actively being persecuted for our faith, yeah,
Sure.
if we're not being persecuted like first century Christians, we're not being threatened with stoning or crucifixion, you know, I think another one of the enemy's tactics to kind of keep us out of the fight is to give us worldly desires to kind of dull our senses.
Yeah, keep us just comfortable and passive.
Comfortable, passive, complacent. And so there, no matter where you are in the world, like, there is going to be forces working against you and your faith. So, and I think that's very applicable to us as young adults. And so I hope that also that what young adults profit out of this podcast is that it kind of opens their eyes and makes them more zealous.
Yeah.
And, you know, to kind of, I think it also is, it would help them to really discern and defend, you know, their faith, their belief system, you know, have a hard filter whenever they're consuming anything.
Yeah, that's right. I think, that word filter, you know, the Bible needs to be our filter, but we also need to know how to ask questions of movies to discern what the messages are, and then filter those messages through the Bible. Because if we don't understand what the messages are that are being preached to us, they just kind of soak in. And so I really think this podcast not only can benefit, you know, parents and young adults, but also anybody who is alive, because David and I were talking about this earlier, but the messages that are in these really popular movies, it's not just a new thing. It's been going on since the earliest cartoons. You know, we were talking about messages back in, what was it, Pinocchio, which, to be fair, there's a lot more good messages in Pinocchio than maybe there are in some of the newer movies. But there are also, and we'll talk about this whenever we debrief that movie, but there are some things that are very contrary to the Christian worldview, and there might be some people who were watching that movie in theaters when they were kids, soaked in some of those messages, and, you know, they're quite a bit older now, and they could really benefit from a podcast like this.
I think it's a good point that you made, is that I've seen a lot of people recently just be like, wow, how did Disney movies get this way? Why is the world's upside down? Where did this change happen?
Yeah.
It's
been happening.
They act like it's been so sudden, but really we're only experiencing the crescendo of it. Like, it's always been there. It's just way more obvious now.
Yeah. So David, are we trying to just bash on movies and bash on Disney? Is that what we're here to do?
No, not at all. These movies, media, art, like I've said before, they can be very powerful tools. They engage with our senses emotionally, and it can really move us. It's just that in a sinful, fallen world, it can fall into the wrong hands and be used to do a lot of damage. But I think it can also be used to forward the kingdom of heaven. And there are some good examples I've seen, you know, where I've seen Christians actually take art and media and use it to impact for the kingdom of God. And it's a beautiful thing.
Yes, that really is. Well, David, I want to take some time and let people hear a little bit of your story, because I think that's really going to help people understand where we are coming from, but where you have come from.
Yes.
So why don't you tell us, you know, just kind of the start of how you got passionate about Disney, because you wanted to work for Disney and be a Disney Imagineer. So maybe could you go back and share with us a little bit, kind of from the beginning, a little bit more about your story?
Yes, and so that is very well, I would say, intertwined with my artistic talent that I developed at a very young age. So I grew up, you know, in a fairly average, you know, lifestyle. I had the world and the Bible influence my life in my youth. I had a lot of exposure to the world, but also a lot of exposure to church. And so when it came to my dad's side of things, he raised me on musicals. My dad is a music man. He is by far like one of the most talented musicians I've ever known.
Yeah, I've heard him play. Very talented.
Yeah, he used to be a show choir director. He's retired now, but he he was always the biggest critic I've ever known. Like, if he comes to like a stage musical production that you put on and he gives you the thumbs up, like, that's how you know you've appeased the Anton ego of critics,
Wow.
you know. And so that's where I'm coming from, is someone who through his own filter of what he thought was good music, he would expose me to it.
Right.
And so
that's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool. But, you know, a lot of early Disney films were in that category for him,
Yeah.
and so he would play those for me when I was very little. I mean, like, his most favorite was The Lion King, so I would watch The Lion King a lot as a kid, and so, like, that was the beginning of it. You know, he's the one that really got me into Disney. When I was, I'd say, like, when I was not even really a year old, I was still an infant. My dad took me and my older brother Eddie, who was like 2 at the time. We went to Disneyland, and he did not think that I would be able to remember anything that I see or experience, but he took me on this adorable little ride. You might know it. It's called It's a Small World. A lot of little kids love that ride, but me as a little kid, like, I had a very special, like, I want to say obsession, you know, but that was the start. My love for Disney ultimately boiled down to my favorite ride at Disneyland, It's a Small World. And I want to kind of circle back on that a little bit later, because that ride at Disneyland actually, I think, has something special tied into what we're talking about with messages and media and stuff. We'll get back to that.
I think I know where you're going with that. There's maybe a way to kind of redeem that and read some Revelation theology into there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, stay tuned. But so as a kid, I loved going to Disneyland, and my mom always tells me, like, when I was little, if I had a really bad week, she'd take me to Disneyland, and it's like, oh, everything's better. And so there was something unique, something special about it that just didn't feel like anything else. The real world. I mean, it is in the real world, but the outside world, I guess you would say. But what I realized is that the people who made Disneyland are just crafty artists who know how to engage the senses to make you feel like you're not in this world. They've used their talent to kind of immerse you somewhere else.
Right. Isn't the whole idea is that it's magical?
The whole idea is that it's magical. And I really bought into that as a child. But by the grace of God, I was simultaneously being indoctrinated by the Bible at a young age. You know, I'd hear the Bible stories. I mean, like, my mom, my grandparents, they really poured into me spiritually. My grandfather, who recently passed away about almost 2 years ago, he was a really good spiritual influence in my life. He was a Bible teacher at Del Cerro Baptist Church, and that's where I grew up going as a kid. And so, you know, I got the gospel at a young age. I understood I'm a sinner. I need forgiveness. Jesus is the way. And that decision just sounded like a no-brainer to me.
And I'm just curious, at that point, did you realize that maybe the differing worldviews that were kind of colliding, or the differences between the messages that were being preached by the media, Disney, and the messages that you were learning, you know, from the Bible in Sunday school? Or at that point, were you not really thinking much about that?
I wasn't thinking a lot about it, but thank the Lord for my mom, who, you know, would catch on to some things.
She was discerning maybe some of the more blatant messages.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, well, for instance, she would look at the obvious. Like, if my mom would keep me away from certain things.
Okay.
She would keep me away from Harry Potter because of witchcraft. She did not want me influenced by that. But she herself actually used to get into Harry Potter a lot. Like, she loved the books. But she found out that J.K. Rowling actually studied, like, the occult to create spells and stuff. And she's just like, that's satanic. obsessed over something satanically inspired.
Interesting. So she was kind of discerning some of how it was influencing her
Yeah.
and didn't want that passed on to you.
Yeah. And so in her eyes, It's a Small World was harmless. But
Got it.
another one of my favorites at Disneyland was it was called the Enchanted Tiki Room, and it's all about like Hawaiian Polynesian mythology. And like she thought when she came with me the first time to watch it, and I was so into it. My mom was like, "Oh, these singing birds and flowers are cute, but what's with the tiki statues?" And then one of the birds at the part of the end of the show says, "Be careful, my friends. The gods have been angered by all the celebrating." And that
Okay.
was like an alarm bell in her head, just like, what did I just bring my son into? So, stuff like that. And she also kept me away from Disney films like Hercules that had to do with Greek gods, you know, stuff like that. It's not
Okay.
that, so at that age, I did not think about messages that movies were telling me. I was just thinking about, there's only one God.
Okay.
And this movie has other gods in it, so that's not true. And
Okay.
so my mom really wanted to kind of keep me away from anything that had other gods.
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
that was like the seed that kind of gave me the idea of, I guess there's a lot of bad influences in the world. So it's not that I wasn't completely out of mind about it. I just didn't realize the depths of it. And so I would let other worldly influences just kind of come alongside, like the more deceptive ones.
Yeah, because sometimes the most blatant ones are in some ways the least harmful because they're just so obviously different from the Christian worldview. I think sometimes the more dangerous ones are the ones that people aren't able to discern right away, and it just kind of soaks in, and all of a sudden, a student gets to college and their faith has deconstructed, and it's like, where did that come from? Well,
Yeah.
the seeds were planted
Yes,
long.
exactly. And so fast forward a little bit, the thing about It's a Small World is that I loved it so much that I wanted to recreate it in my house. The outside of the ride is this amazing geometric facade of world landmarks creating this mega clock tower. And every 15 minutes, it would actually wind up its wheels and open doors like a cuckoo clock to tell you the time. Like, for my imagination, that was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. It's just like, whoa, it moves, it opens doors, there's hidden stuff that I didn't know was there, and it does that every 15 minutes. I guess that's just the way my mind thought, but it was captivating. Like, for me to go to Disneyland, I was satisfied if I would just stand outside of It's a Small World. If I didn't even ride it, I would just look at it, stare at it, and enjoy the clock.
Wow.
It didn't take too long for me to grab a pencil and paper and try to recreate it. I would start drawing it.
Mm.
And there came a point, like, I think I was about 6 years old. I was able to draw it from memory.
Wow.
I did not need a picture. I just knew what it looked like. And my parents, I didn't know this until I was way older, but like when I would draw stuff that I would see at Disneyland from memory, my parents would actually look at the drawings or like take pictures of them or even take the drawing itself. And they'd go to Disneyland and like with me, and while I'm enjoying like watching the parade or something, they'd be taking notes. They'd be taking
Wow.
notes just to see like, does our son have photographic memory? And they took my picture, compared it to the real thing of It's a Small World, and they're just like, holy cow, our son has photographic memory.
Wow.
So they recognized artistic talent in me at a very young age, and they
Yeah.
wanted to develop that.
And that's pretty crazy because I have, 4 kids, and that would have been pretty crazy to see any of them drawing that at 6 years old.
Yeah, and so they would sign me up for art classes, painting lessons, all those kind of things. And so for as long as I can remember, I've loved art. I've loved drawing, and so naturally in middle school I would start taking art classes because I'm like, in elementary school it was a no-no to draw in class. And my teachers would come down really hard on me for drawing in class. It was like a crime, and I didn't understand it. I'm just like, what's wrong with it?
So they wanted you paying attention to something else.
They did,
Yeah.
of course, But drawing is a way to stimulate creativity, and so I mean, like it can help you pay attention.
Yeah,
So
I've heard that. Some
so
people.
so yeah, and so art was never a real subject in school for me until middle school. And this is another important point in
Okay.
my life in terms of my love for Disney and art. I took an art class with a middle school teacher. His name was Mr. Peluso, and he was a retired Disney animator.
Wow, no way.
Yeah, no way, right?
Did he work on any movies? Like, or what did he do?
I think he never did say, but he would always talk about his favorite Disney film, Pinocchio, because he loved its message. And that, I think, also planted a seed that gave me the idea of, oh, movies have messages beneath what's on the surface.
That's
And
interesting. Yeah.
I was the only kid in his class that knew Disney films as well as he did. And so he like asked the whole class, like, there's this one thing that Jiminy Cricket says to Pinocchio. That's kind of the log line of the entire movie. Do you guys know what that is? And me being shy, I'm like, and he looks at me with kind of like a winky eye, just like, yeah, go on, say it. Like, let your conscience be your guide. And it's just like, he talked about the morals of Pinocchio. He talked about, you know, what Pleasure Island represented in Pinocchio and how that represents temptations and foolishness. And though it's pleasurable in the beginning, you really make a donkey out of yourself.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
that's really interesting because that, I mean, we would agree as Christians that that's a pretty good message there. Now we would say as followers of Jesus, the Holy Spirit needs to be our guide.
yes,
But
absolutely.
our conscience is given to us by God as well, although it's not the same as the Holy Spirit. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that's one of the good messages in Pinocchio. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool.
And so, of course, him and I having the same affinity for Disney, you can imagine we had a really strong connection. You know, he was the one thing I was looking forward to all day, like in middle school, because in middle school, like I wasn't the most mature kid, and I really would set myself up to get bullied a lot, and so like I don't look back at a lot of middle school memories with a lot of fondness, but whatever had to do with Mr. Peluso really made going to school worth it for me. It was like a safe space. It was amazing, and like he was such an underappreciated teacher because most teachers and classes that I had were just very like narrowly focused, like this is school time, no drawing, no this. It's like, are you trying to make my life miserable? But it's like, but with Mr. Peluso, on the other hand, the class is literally drawing. So that's one thing. But for another thing, his assignments were having us draw Disney characters. And so he taught me how to draw Mickey Mouse the way that the animators do. He showed me the technique, the geometric shapes, and how to use positive and negative space, and the value scale. Like, my art took a whole new level with this one guy. And he had so much wisdom that he wanted to give to his students. But if you know anything about middle school kids, we are the most unfiltered. And so a lot of times, like, the other kids were just like, shut up, old man, just teach us how to draw. And I'm just like, you guys don't appreciate
Right.
what he's
You
talking
guys
about here.
had something really special there with someone who was a Disney animator
Yeah.
trying to teach you, something so profound.
Yeah, exactly. And so it really opened my eyes to like the things I loved as a kid. There's something deeper underneath it, And so that really, at that point, like I was very known for my, which I would say, Disney-ness. Going into high school, I remember my nickname was Disney David. There were multiple Davids, and so like they would kind of, if someone's talking about David, they're like, "Oh, which David? This David or Disney David?" Like that. But that's how much of a staple it was about me, and I think that's where I started to kind of see the issue there. It's just like, that's what I'm known for. I mean, I love Disney, but is this really like the ultimate thing in my life? Like, I'm a Christian. I believe the Bible. I believe that Jesus died for my sins, and it wasn't until I really got to college, with your help, Kevin, that I kind of started to see, like, what impact do I want to have in this world? Because in high school, I had it in my mind, and because of Mr. Peluso, I was just like, I want to be a Disney Imagineer.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't want to skip that part because I feel like that's
Yes.
pretty important because when I first met you, it was actually 2020 in a Zoom call. I was in this room.
Oh yeah.
I was in this room on a Zoom call with you, and your life goal was to be a Disney Imagineer.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of going, all right, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So yeah, just sharing a little bit more about that, and then how some of your mindset and perspective has changed over the last 4 years or so.
So as my
5 years.
Yeah, so as I was getting older and my art was developing and really getting an appreciation for it, I was like, who are the people that make Disney theme parks? What do they do there? And so at 2020, there was like when Disney Plus just like debuted,
Yeah.
they had this documentary series called The Imagineering Story. And it gave a whole historical documentary series explaining the history of the Disney company through the lens of the Imagineers. How did they create Disneyland? How did that turn into 6 theme parks around the entire world? And how do they continue to develop them today? How are they actively at work? And seeing snippets of that, I'm like, whoa, I would love this.
Right.
I'd be like, it's like, I could
So
be,
this is like right before I met you.
right before, yes. But when I was thinking about something that was said in the documentary that stuck in the back of my head. One of the legendary Imagineers, I think his name was Bob Weiss. He asked one of the older Imagineers who mentored him, he just said, like, what's the meaning of all this?
Why? That's a good question to pay attention to.
He said, why do we make theme parks? What is the point of all this? What's the deeper meaning? He said. And his answer was this. The deeper meaning behind Disney theme parks is this. You're going to be okay. No matter how screwed up your life can be, no matter what's going on in the real world, you're going to be okay. Someone else, another Imagineer said, like, some people think that we're creating an escape from reality when really we're trying to make a better reality. He didn't elaborate on that, but I wasn't quite sure what he meant. Did he mean, like, does he want people to see the world more optimistically? Or does he want to create another heaven?
Okay.
And so concerns and thoughts lingered in the back of my head as I was still pursuing this career.
Right. And maybe, could I mention a couple things right there?
Yeah.
Because, that it's hard to say without being able to ask that guy more questions.
Yes.
What do you mean by that? But I could see another meaning of it as we are trying to do something that will create the new reality in the future.
Yes.
That will influence culture in a way that reality is going to shift, or that the way things are is going to change. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's maybe one way of interpreting that.
That could be a way to think about it. And so I come into SDSU, I start coming to Challenge, and Kevin...
And what's Challenge, for those who might not know?
So Challenge SDSU is a college ministry aimed at college students to really meet people where they're at in terms of, where they are with God, and to explore faith in Jesus at their own pace. It's an outlet for Christians to gather. If you are a Christian, if you really are following Jesus, then it's a place for you to grow and develop your faith and flourish it with other college students. It's a place to build community. Or even just for those on the fringes who are curious, it's for them to come and just understand, like, what is this whole Jesus thing? What is it all about? And so that's where that was the only thing that I was able to go to that was meeting in person. It was COVID at the time.
Yeah.
And funny thing is that I actually was not planning on going to San Diego State. That was not the original plan. I was going to go to CSU Fullerton to fully pursue this whole Imagineering thing.
What God did.
Look at what God did. Like, he used a global pandemic as well as a lot of different things at home that really was giving me signs like, I really don't think I should leave. I think God's calling me to stay here. There's so much needs that need to be met, and I also have an acceptance letter to San Diego State, so why don't we just stick with my backup school?
Yeah. But even at that time, just to clarify, your desire and your plan was still to become a Disney Imagineer.
Yeah,
It was just
to
go
do
to
it
San
at
Diego
San Diego
State
State.
first and start there.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And so I majored in interior architecture to kind of develop my artistic skills to three-dimensional, to the real world, use my art and combine it with engineering and, construction.
And usually when people think about interior architecture, they're thinking, to help, people design homes or offices or buildings or whatever.
Yeah.
But that was not your goal to use with that. You wanted it to use for
or to work towards my Imagineering. I thought it would teach me software and skills that I think would be useful, because Imagineers are not just artists, they're also architects, engineers.
Right.
So I was working toward that.
And that is Disney's term for one of their engineers and artists, isn't it?
Yeah, Imagineer is a mixture of both. So it's like, well, I've spent most of my life just working on the Imagine part. Now it's time to develop the inner part, the skills of it. So that's why I originally did interior architecture. But, through those years, I found that the most impactful thing all my college life was going to challenge. It really, I would say it stirred me up by way of reminder of who my first love is. I was discipled by a few guys. Shout out to Brian Mims, Josh Jenkins, Kevin. All three of you guys, I think, were the most influential in my earliest years of college, where, like you said, that's kind of where the question becomes, is your faith inherited from your parents that you're just going to drop at college, or is this something that you're going to make your own and you're going to pursue? Is this where your life will go? And so, in terms of following Jesus and Imagineering, it's not that I saw them as diametrically opposed, but there were some things, key moments in pursuing Imagineering, but also in pursuing a relationship with Jesus Christ, that I was seeing some things. I'm like, signs, wondering, does God want this? Was this career choice, this desire, if you will, to do this, was this led by God, or was this led by me for self-glory?
I think that's a really important question for anybody to be asking about a career choice or a life choice.
Yeah, and so that was very difficult for me to examine, and it took my 4 years in college to do that. But with your help, with the help of Josh, with the help of Brian, all three of you guys in different, unique ways showed me, why is the gospel so important? Why should that be our life goal, no matter where we are?
Yeah.
No matter where we are. And so it's not that I see anything wrong with going into the Imagineering field and still trying to be a witness there. It's not that I see anything wrong with that, or that can't happen. It's just that I've seen in my own heart, a kind of gravitational entanglement where I want to be very careful that I am not giving my heart there.
Yeah.
Especially with a lot of the more recent developments that I've seen in a lot of their more recent films that just kind of show me morally, where is this going?
Yeah.
And so...
And David, I know at one point we had a conversation, and I don't even know if you necessarily remember it, but I remember you're just processing, am I going to be, if I'm going there, if I'm going to be an Imagineer, then that means I am going to be a witness. I'm not going into a place where they uphold my values and we're going to be working together as a team, to promote the same values. You knew you were going to be going into a culture that was very contrary to the culture that Jesus is trying to spread with his kingdom.
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about that? When was the kind of the big realization that, wow, I am going to be, a sheep amongst a different flock, if maybe to use that analogy, or I would be going in to a place where it's not really just me going in with a bunch of people that think like me, but I would be going into something very worldly, something very contrary to Christian culture, and I would need to be strong and steadfast and a missionary if I go there.
Right.
When was that kind of made clear to you?
That's a really good question. You know, I think where it really kind of clicked for me was with a class that I took. It was an art class, but it had to do with comics and sequential media. And this also was the realization point in which I realized, being so much in the art world, what kind of environment I am in. Now, I will say, before all of this, I went to an art school in high school. I majored in art, but I was so immersed and around people in theater and film who are all in the arts together and who had very, very liberal points of view, politically and religiously. People who, whose belief systems I think are very diametrically opposed to the Bible. And I just remember seeing how seriously they take their art, how much they want to say something they're passionate about. But that was developed and cultivated, that idea was cultivated in me leading up to this point. But when I got to this class about comics and sequential media, the teacher, who I respect and admire, who I think is a great artist and is really passionate about what he does, and he liked me too. He was similar to Mr. Peluso, not as personal as you would say, but like he liked me, I liked him.
Yeah.
One thing he said about art, though, that really made me start to really think is all art has something to say about the time in which it was made, about today, about the real world.
Right.
And he gave some examples about it. He gave examples about like Iron Man, the first Iron Man comics. If you look, his origin story is that he becomes a superhero because he gets kidnapped by, an enemy army in a war, and he breaks out of the cave by building his own iron suit, and he becomes Iron Man. In the comics, I do believe it was, I want to say, the Vietnam War. It was a war that was before the early 2000s, but he was caught in enemy territory. But his point was that in 2009, or 2008, when Marvel Studios came out with the first Iron Man film, instead of being captured by World War II or Vietnam War, like Vietnamese soldiers,
Right.
he was taken captive by Afghanistan terrorists.
Interesting.
On the war,
Yeah.
During the War on Terror, which in the early 2000s, that was fresh on Americans' minds.
That's right. Yep.
And so his example there was that, all art addresses an issue of its time. All art is a product of its time.
Right. It's not merely for entertainment, which...
It's not merely for entertainment.
I think what I'm going to let you keep expanding on that, but I just want to point out that, that's one of the reasons we are doing this podcast is because for pretty much every form of media, there's a purpose behind it. There's a purpose for it. There's something that is trying to be communicated other than just, hey, sit back, have fun, eat some popcorn, and enjoy. There's something that they're trying to teach, a message to spread, and a lot of people don't even think about that when they sit down to watch a movie. So,
yes.
Okay.
Exactly. And
Keep
so
going.
that singular phrase that he would repeat over and over again, he wanted to drill that point home with us. All art is a product of its time and always has something to say. I mean, around the same time, I was starting to notice certain Disney films and more recent, like a lot of recent movies or Broadway musicals or media that comes out that is a form of art, has very bad things to say.
Yeah.
I was like, these messages are very blatant. They're very, they're not as entertaining anymore because they're overshadowed by some sort of political messaging.
Yeah.
Where it's like, well, okay, now I feel like I'm being preached at. Where it's like a lot of movies before would kind of be subtle.
Yeah.
If they did have something to say, it was subtle, and the subtlety was starting to drop. And so, in a way, I guess it was kind of like God unveiling what's really kind of intentional behind a lot of things that come out of Hollywood or the art industry. And a lot of my art classes, we do projects, and art students, they have stuff to say with their art. And sometimes a lot of them are just very political, theologically liberal in how they think. It seemed to, and didn't seem to bother anyone if Christianity was being targeted as like the sort of target of criticism, to be made fun of, or to focus too much on like Christianity is bad because the Crusades or
Right.
something like that. They'll look at religious hypocrisy. They love to talk about how hypocritical, certain Christians are.
Right.
That's all they can think about.
Yeah, or people
But
who claim to be Christian.
but then they
Yeah.
preach a lot about how we must have respect for someone who's of the Muslim faith or Buddhist, or it's like,
Right.
okay,
A little bit of a large double standard there.
there's a pretty
Yeah.
large double. So seeing
Yeah.
that double standard in the art world and putting together what he just said, all art talks about something in the real world of when it was made. It just kind of really clicked like that, just like.
Yeah, and David, I also remember, as I've talked with you, there was a point, I think, when you realized, wait a minute, if I go work there, then I'm helping produce things that are preaching a message contrary to what I believe.
Yes, and so that's another point there, is that like recent Disney films have been putting out horrible messaging that I think have really been plagued by, people who really believe that whatever their political religious opinion is gospel. That's another thing I've realized, is that, a lot of artists, I mean, we're all prone to sin and pride and rebellion,
Right.
but when you're not following Jesus Christ and you're very talented in the art world, and you think that what your worldview is gospel, you're going to use your art to convince others to think the same way.
Yeah.
And so,
And I don't blame them.
I don't blame
I mean,
them.
it's a powerful means of communicating. Like
Yeah,
you said.
it's a way that they express themselves. And so, if Christ isn't at the center, then, like, of course, that's probably where I would resort with my artistic talent. But I've seen firsthand the kind of power that it has. And it has wide, massive impact, because Hollywood movies are, the people who make those they come from the same backgrounds. The people that were just like me, that would draw in elementary school and their teachers would yell at them for that. The people who took art classes, who know how to draw, who know how to master their craft. Creativity, the creative minds, they are capable of making amazing things, and we've seen amazing things, and they create household movies that everyone knows and loves, that we love to quote all the time. Like, I quote movies verbatim like you wouldn't even believe.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
but yes, I do remember talking to you about that, Kevin, because I realized it's like, well, I really want to work for Disney, but working for Disney, I don't have a voice necessarily.
So you couldn't say, "Hey, everyone, I don't think this is ethical or moral what we're doing. Therefore, I want to work on a different project, or we're going to take this movie in a different direction."
Yeah.
You would not come with that type of sway.
I would be extremely pressured to compromise, and I've got no backing on me to give me any kind of immunity where it's like, oh, we got to keep him. No, I can be fired right like that very easily. And so, kind of putting two and two together, I'm just like, dude, I don't think this is the move. Yep. And so I was weighing more of my options, because like, well, okay, even if I did pursue this career, my whole life moves to LA. And if I do that, I have to church shop. I mean, because I'm not going to move anywhere where I don't know I have a good, doctrinally sound, church that I can fellowship well in. And I have that in Mission Trails in a very beautiful way. I really respect my pastor, Kyle. I mean, like, most recently he brought us to the book of Judges, and his preaching on that really helped me understand, the messages of Judges, what we can take from that. Yeah. And so it's like, okay, I'm being fed by the Bible, but I'm also surrounded with peers that I can do life with. When I do church, I don't want to just sit in the pew and then leave and say hi to my neighbor maybe, and that's how far my fellowship goes. I'm a strong believer that true fellowship and true discipleship involves letting people see everything in your life, your weaknesses, your strengths, your blind spots. How can we really grow in Christ if we don't have brothers to sharpen iron with? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right.
And so, for another personal reason, I just realized it's like, what I have here with this church community is hard to recapture. somewhere else, starting over. And so, I mean, like, obviously, like, wherever God calls me to, he'll provide. And so, let's say if every other factor points that I should go to LA, I'll bear with it. I'll I'll make it work, and I'll let God do the rest when it comes to putting me in a good church. If it's important to him, it's going to happen,
Right. So in other words, if you were certain it was God's will that he was leading you to move, to LA, become an Imagineer or something like that, you would do that. But what you're saying is for
Yeah.
you right now,
Every
with common sense.
Yes. With every factor that I can weigh does not point me to go to LA. And
Yeah.
so seeing how God was not paving the way for my life to move over there, and also just seeing this kind of, what I would say, just very gross moralism at Disney was enough to kind of disenfranchise me from it. And in a time where I've just had such exponential growth in my relationship with Christ, it was becoming so much more important for me to let that be my life. Okay, people call me Disney David in high school. I don't want to be known as that anymore. Like, if people know me, I just want them to know me as the man who follows Jesus Christ. If any unbeliever in my family or any friends of mine who I have, like, if they ever had any biblical questions, or if they really were seeking God, I want them to know that there is someone in their life who they can talk to about.
Yeah.
And so I want to be that guy. And though it's a nice thing about me that I love Disney films, and I can nerd out about that with people, I don't want that to be my personality, where for such a long time it was.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, one of the reasons I really wanted you to share your story is because I do think people need to know that as we're having these conversations, especially about a lot of Disney movies, you're not just someone who watched a few Disney movies and is a critic of them.
Yes.
You are someone who has loved and cherished the art and thought that has gone into these movies, into Disneyland and the history of it, and you know what you're talking about when you're talking about a Disney movie. You've watched it again and again. I mean, many of them, probably countless times, and could probably name off all of them in order of when they were produced. I don't know.
I can actually.
So for me, I watch a movie once or twice, and I have not seen every Disney movie now. I'll be watching them to provide a theological perspective as we put out these episodes. But I want everyone to know that we've got David here, who used to be known as Disney David, now redeemed by Christ. He is a son of God, but he can provide a lot of expertise in terms of really thinking about the movies that we're going to be talking about here.
Yeah, and that's another good point that you make, is that I don't want, I believe God can use anything, and that, everything that God has used in my life in terms of the arts and with Disney films, like, I want to be able to use that and redeem it to kind of show others, like, okay, so if that's how art works, that it's always got something to say, then how do Disney films do that? How do other movies that are very popular, how do they subtly slide in those messages? And how could they influence us? How could they...
And are you talking about positive messages at this point?
Both.
Okay.
Positive or negative. Like, how could they do that? And so I want to be able to kind of use all that time I've spent with watching movies, enjoying art, using that, now with a more grounded biblical perspective. I want to be able to kind of use that and enlighten others. And so, but yeah, keep in mind, it's not all bad. Like, I know some Disney films that I'd highly recommend to Christian parents who are bringing up their kids, that I think have really good messages that are biblically rooted, even if it's in a secular setting.
Yeah.
And so there is some gems hidden within a lot of these kind of crevices, which I think brings me back to It's a Small World.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if you could bring us back, because you had mentioned at the beginning of your story that
when I was
swing back around.
When I was very little, that was my favorite ride ever because of how much it stimulated my creativity. But as I got older, getting an understanding of intentionality behind the things that people make, I was curious about It's a Small World, because I heard it said somewhere that there's a reason why It's a Small World was made when it was made. It was in the late 60s. They were fresh off World War II and the Cold War that followed afterwards, and there was just a lot of division and tension and disunity in the world as a whole. And It's a Small World was created because Walt Disney was approached by people putting on the New York World's Fair. And It's a Small World was made to be a pavilion for it, sponsored by Pepsi-Cola and UNICEF. And UNICEF was this organization that was trying to help children around the world. And so UNICEF was just like, Disney, can you create a ride that is about the children of the world? And one of the Imagineers named Rolly Crump, a very talented man, he had the idea of a boat ride, a boat ride that takes you throughout the world. But given the time that this ride was made, they were wondering, what are we saying with this ride? In a world of division, what do we want to say in a boat ride about children around the world? And so Disney reached out to these songwriters, these two brothers named Richard and Bob Sherman. And these two guys are responsible for some of the most iconic, catchy tunes of Disney you've ever heard. They wrote the music for Mary Poppins. They wrote It's a Small World. They wrote There's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow from the Carousel of Progress. I'm not sure if you know what that one is, but they have a track record of just classic Disney songs that everyone knows and loves. And so they wrote the song It's a Small World. And originally, they wrote it as a ballad, a short, a slow song.
Okay.
It's a world of laughter. But
wow, that's hard to imagine. That's crazy.
It is hard to imagine, but it was because Walt Disney listened to it. He loved it, but he's like, this song is a happy, energetic ride. Let's speed it up a little bit. But the lyrics in the song are trying to say something. It's a world of laughter, a world of tears. It's a world of hope and a world of fears. There is so much that we share that it's time we're aware it's a small world after all. They were trying to preach unity cross-culturally,
right,
where war has torn the world apart. And they're trying to say, hey, you want to know what makes us similar? We all laugh, we all cry, we all hope for things, we all fear for things. There's so much that we have in common. I think it's time that we took the time to acknowledge the world is not as big and complicated as you think it is. It's very simple. We're all just human beings.
Right. We all experience the same types of emotions.
We all experience the same types
needs,
of emotions. Yeah. And the way that the ride itself kind of explores that message, it takes you throughout the world, region by region, country by country, with dolls dressed up in native costumes, but not necessarily in a sort of stereotypical offensive way, but in an appreciative way, where in that country, any little girl or little boy would envy to wear that kind of outfit,
So it's kind of the best of.
The best of. Right. Yeah, they didn't show you, like, the worst of in these countries. Like, they gave you the best of the world and what other cultures have to offer and what is unique about them. How do they dance? How do they sing? What do they dress like in special occasions for dances and stuff? And they're all singing in their own native language the same song. And they're all dolls made of the same mold, which I think is very symbolic. It's like all we did is change the hair and costume of these dolls, but they're all the same figure. Just copied and pasted. It's appreciating it's appreciating cultures of the world. And they're all children, by the way, because it's childlike optimism and innocence is, freshly in view here. Where I think when we get older, we kind of lose that, where it's like children, can be very optimistic.
Jesus said a few things about the children, huh?
Jesus said a lot of things about the children. We're
Yeah.
getting there. Okay. But something amazing that happens is that after you've gone through every continent of the world, the end of the ride is everybody from the entire world in one room, all dressed in white. So it's like they're taking the richest, most amazing clothing you can get in their world culture, and it's white and gold now. And they're
Yeah.
all singing together in unison. But depending on where you are, because there's 6 Disneylands in the whole world, 5 of them with It's a Small World in it. And wherever you go, if you go to Disneyland and Disney World, they all are singing in English together. But if you go to Paris, which I've been to Paris, they're all singing in French together at the end. If you go to Hong Kong, they alternate between English and Cantonese. And if you go to Tokyo, they're all singing in Japanese at the end. And that is directed toward the specific audience that they're reaching at that very moment, to kind of bring the message of there's so much that we share that it's time we're aware. It's a small world after all.
Okay.
There's also the second verse of that song. There is just one moon and one golden sun, and a smile means friendship to everyone. Though the mountains divide and the oceans are wide, it's a small world after all. The one part of the one verse in that stanza that really sticks out to me is smile means friendship to everyone. Like, if someone smiles at you, are you tempted to smile back?
Yeah.
Even in the slightest? And so it's just like there's people in the world who don't have written languages. They can only verbally communicate, which Bible translators have had to create audio Bibles for those people.
Yeah.
But it's like, you ever think that they smile to show joy or friendliness? It's trying to point something out. The things that make us different in the world, culturally, culturally, linguistically, are not actually bad things. We treat them as such in a broken, sinful world, but we don't need to. I think about the gospel, I think about, the blood of Jesus. The gospel is what truly unites us cross-culturally. I think about the missions trip I took to Southeast Asia, and I've met local believers there, and seeing them pray in their own language, something was just beautiful about that. It's like they're relating to the same God that I worship in their language.
Yeah.
And of course, I think my favorite Bible verse that I always just love to hear is Revelation 7:9. After this, this is John speaking. He says, I looked and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, that is Jesus, clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands. And I was thinking about that as I was writing It's a Small World one time. I'm just like, hold on, if you go to the end of the ride and just put palm branches in everyone's hands, you've got Revelation 7:9 right here. And they're all children dolls. And Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven belongs to that like a child, who becomes like a child, with childlike faith. It's a Small World is trying to selectively look at, if we only looked at the world in a positive lens, what could we get out of that? And they package it all into this ride that is trying to preach to you, it's a small world after all. We're all human beings. We all should appreciate each other for what makes us different. But we also need to recognize there is so much more that we have in common.
Yeah.
And so, secularly speaking, that can kind of be like a kumbaya, world peace kind of message. It's like, all right, take a bath, hippie kind of thing. Like,
Right.
I can see people thinking that way. And I know the intention was not, there was no gospel or Christian intention behind making It's a Small World.
Yeah.
But if I squinted my eyes a little bit, I can see how the Christian influence on the world can lead even secular people to create this.
Yeah. So this would be an example.
Yeah.
Of that.
That would be an example of something pure that the big guys in Hollywood and big companies like Disney, they have the potential to make something like that. It's a Small World, I would say, is something completely harmless that has a good message. Christians and non-Christians alike, I think, would agree we should all get along.
Yeah.
But the way that they kind of made the ride and the way they're presenting their message, to me, is just like, this is more Christianly influenced than they probably even realize.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that it kind of goes back to the Christian idea and the Jewish idea that we're all created in the image of God.
Yeah.
When you mention all the dolls were made, the same.
Yep.
I just think about how God created every person in His image, male and female. He created them, and that's why we all have rights and dignity and value, and we're equal.
Exactly.
And I think where one could get a little bit lost or a little bit caught up in it is to see a ride like that and go, well, Jesus isn't a part of this. Maybe we can create some sort of utopia without Christ. And that's where, as a Christian, we have to go, we need Him.
That is most definitely where I would differ. I'm just like, no, that's not the takeaway here. And I think that's also what concerned me when I heard that Imagineer say, we're making a better reality. Mm-hmm. We're making a better world. It's just like, okay, that just sounds like you're trying to make heaven without God at the throne.
Yeah, and that is definitely, I think, something. One of the messages that has somehow seeped in to our culture.
And so it's a double-edged sword, unfortunately. But I can see how they can create gems with harmless messages that the world can still use that and twist it.
Right.
Obviously. I'm not trying to convince you guys that It's a Small World is inspired ride by God. No, that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to say I grow a huge appreciation for movies that, though they don't intend to, they do have Christian-inspired messages that we could use evangelistically.
That's right.
I think.
And we might use the term, redeeming that movie or that ride or that whatever it might be.
That thing you love.
There can be a way to take it and then, redeem it for Christ and talk about it as a way to, help point people towards Jesus, or even, point us to worship Jesus more.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's why, to this day, It's a Small World is still my favorite ride at Disneyland, because of what it's trying to say. But I do recognize it's like, well, they've got all the pieces there without the God in the center. And so because I realize, like, whoa, this can so easily stimulate my senses to try to, like, picture paradise without God, I don't like to think about that. And so that's another reason why I'm trying to, like, kind of keep a safe distance, have that hardline discernment. Like Disney, I draw the line here.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that I can't enjoy your movies on occasion or have a good day at Disneyland. Like, that's totally fine. But I've seen the power of art and what it can do, and I would like to, as so much as I can, redeem that for good kingdom use.
Yeah, that's right. Well, David, I think we're about out of time for today.
Yep.
Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Yeah.
For those of you who are listening in, we are going to be starting up with picking one movie at a time. And so what I would love from you is if you would post in the comments what movies you are, curious about and would like to hear us discuss. We've got a running list. But if we, you might be able to sway us, if there's a bunch of people who are really wanting to, hear about a specific Disney movie.
We are open to requests.
Yeah, we're totally open to requests. Also, we love just, getting to interact with people. So please post any questions, comments. We would love to hear from you. And please keep a lookout for our next podcast coming up. And join us on this journey as we start taking one movie at a time. So thank you so much for watching this first episode of Media Discerned with David Atienza and me, Kevin Thorsell. And we will see you next time on another episode. Thank you so much.